Yo, what is up, everybody? Obviously, the 100 Worst SNES Games video was a huge boon for our channel. If you haven't seen it, check it out here. But I wanted to go ahead and do the same thing for the NES. This is a console that admittedly I'm less familiar with overall than the Super Nintendo. So this took a few weeks of pretty heavy dedication, research, playing a lot of these games over on my Twitch channel where I do stream full time. I think we came up with a pretty solid list of the 100 worst NES games in existence. Now, these are officially licensed games. Nintendo put that seal of quality on all of these games, so I wanted to make things a little tougher. Unlicensed is just a little too easy. So these are games that Nintendo said were ready for release and were ready to go out to the public. Anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. It's a good one. All right, y'all, we're going to go ahead and get started here in a category of games I like to call the fun bad tier. And these are games that, while deserving to be on this list, I feel they are games that I did have some enjoyment with. So I'm cutting them a little bit more slack than some of the other games in this video. We're going to go ahead and start with number 100, and that is The Great Waldo Search. And this is a game that is not going to be a surprise to anybody if you watch the SNES video. It's a game I covered there. It actually made the same placement. And the reason for that is that this game isn't much of a game. There's not a whole lot of content here. It's very quick. What is here is pretty silly and pretty basic. I mean, if you've experienced a Where's Waldo book, you're pretty much getting the same thing here. Albeit, I have to give the NES version some credit here. While there is obviously a detail cutback compared to the 16-bit versions, really it plays very similarly, and you're honestly not missing a whole lot on this NES version. While I can knock it for not having a whole lot of content and being pretty much kind of a fluff game, it is fun for what it is. It did entertain me. I would rather play the 16-bit versions, but honestly, this is a perfectly fine backport. While there isn't a whole lot here, I think what is there is fun enough, at least for 10-15 minutes. Coming in at number 99, of course, we gotta have some Simpsons games on this list. It's no surprise there. We're starting with Bart versus the World, though, and this one is going up pretty high in fun bad because honestly, I feel like this is the best Simpsons game on the console. Now, again, that's not saying much. It made the list. The nice thing about this one is that you do get a variety of gameplay styles, so really things can't get all that bad when you're switching back and forth pretty quick. What is here actually isn't too shabby. You do get some light 2D platforming segments, which platforming really isn't their forte, so it's probably good that they didn't do too much of this. You also get some skateboarding sequences, which I feel like this game gets probably the most flack for because admittedly the collision detection can be a little wonky at times, can be a little frustrating, but I actually found those sequences kind of fun once I got into them. Yes, they're not perfect, but man, there's a decent sense of speed. Once you get into a rhythm, it's actually kind of satisfying. And then you also get a whole bunch of these other different mini games. There's slider puzzles in here, which may or may not be your thing. I personally have played so many damn slider puzzles at this point that I'm kind of starting to get an affinity for them. I don't know if that's Stockholm Syndrome talking or what, but also there's a really simple like Jackpot slot machine one. There's a quiz show, just a whole bunch of different mini games that kind of break things up and make this one a little bit more refreshing than the others. Again, not a perfect game by any means, but honestly, I had fun enough with this one that I'm kind of thinking of playing some more of it at some point, so probably revisit it in the future. At number 98, we have Fist of the North Star, also known as Hokuto no Ken Part 2. I do have the Famicom version here. This is one that for 1989 definitely does not hold up visually very well. I don't think it's honestly looks much more like an earlier Famicom game than it maybe should. You'll also notice that the movement and specifically the jumping in this game is absolutely absurd. It's so silly that it's honestly so bad it's good. I find this one pretty hilarious to play. Admittedly, there are some issues, especially toward the middle of the game. The levels get quite maze-like, labyrinth-like, and it becomes a little hard to navigate. If you take this at face value for what it is, just enjoy the silly, goofy fun of it. There is some fun to be had. I have to admit, it ain't the greatest game though, which is why it's making the list. Next up, we got a twofer at numbers 97 and 96 respectively. We've got RoboCop 2 as well as Darkman. And the reason I'm putting both of these together is because they were both made by Ocean, and from everything I can tell and what I've found online, it seems like they were made on the exact same engine. They look incredibly similar, and let me tell you, they also play incredibly similarly. And I'm gonna go ahead and give RoboCop 2 the slight advantage, the slight edge. Frankly, I think the game is just a little easier to get into. The earlier levels are a little less demanding. It's just more welcoming to the player. Darkman starts off pretty hard just from the get, and honestly it eases up toward the midway point, which is really strange. I'm not sure why they decided to take that approach. So I'm giving RoboCop the edge. Both games are quite slippery in terms of their mechanics and controls, which is a big reason I think these games get a bad rep, maybe a little more than they even deserve. I can admit they're not great games, especially from the platforming side of things, but I had fun with them. There's also some light gun-esque style shooter sequences, which are kind of nice. I don't think they use the zapper though. You just use the D-pad on the controller to move a crosshair around the screen, but a nice mix up to the gameplay formula. Also some unique ideas when it comes to the platforming, including some pretty cool booster platforms that you actually get to ride and control. Some neat ideas in here. It isn't all bad, but I can definitely see where these get some flack, much deserved, but I do kind of find them fun. Coming in at number 95, we have Flying Dragon, and this is a game that was developed by Culture Brain, and I actually like some of their later games, including Flying Dragon on the N64, really fun fighting game. This is an earlier game of theirs, and I feel like maybe this was a case of a dev biting off a little bit more than they could chew. This game actually tries multiple things, and unfortunately, it doesn't do them all super well. You start out playing in a kind of just a side-scrolling 2D platformer style gameplay, and I think a lot of people get confused and turn the game off pretty quick here, because if you don't know what to do, the level will just loop endlessly and you won't make any progress. It actually took me a little bit to figure out what the game wanted, and you actually have to grab these items via killing enemies and these bosses that appear in the levels in order to actually progress on to the next stage. The other gameplay style this game tries is like 1v1 fighting, and it's obviously it's NES era 1v1 fighting. Not a lot of great examples on the system, and I wouldn't call this one a great example either. This one is admittedly a little convoluted in the controls. Now, to give the game some credit, it does try to explain a lot of it in the game itself. You know, a lot of games of this era would have relegated these instructions to the manual. This game actually has in-game instructions, which is nice. I gotta give them some credit, but yeah, still not the most satisfying to play. I do like how much these devs tried to do, and it is commendable, and I did enjoy it for that reason, but I think they should have dialed things back. It probably would have made for a better overall game. And at number 94, we have Total Recall, the Schwarzenegger classic. I absolutely love the movie, so I'll admit this might be making fun bad in part due to my significant love for the Paul Verhoeven film, but I do think this is actually an all-right NES game. Yes, it is flawed. It has that classic licensed game difficulty that's make it impossible to beat in a rental kind of difficulty, but I think once you're able to get past some of the brutal unfairness of the game, there is some fun to be had here. It follows the film pretty closely. Honestly, the presentation's not too shabby overall. I think this one gets more flack than it deserves. Yes, it is an example of a bad NES licensed game, but honestly, I think it's better than a lot of people would give it credit. I actually kind of want to go back to this one. Again, difficulty notwithstanding, I think this one could be fun for people if you're willing to maybe resort to using some save states, or if you're just willing to grind it out and get really good at this. And rounding off Fun Bad tier at number 93 here, we have Rollerblade Racer by High Tech Expressions, and this one squeaks into Fun Bad mostly because I think people are going to look at this game and look at the visuals especially and go, this does not look up to par for NES standards. In fact, I got a couple comments during my live stream of this game that it looked like a game that was made in MS Paint, and once you say that, it's kind of hard to unsee it. Presentation wise, this game definitely is leagues behind where it probably should have been, but honestly, the gameplay, while not great, was enjoyable to me. I actually kind of had some fun with this one. It does have some of that NES hard difficulty. It's kind of reminiscent of Paperboy in terms of its perspective as well as a little bit of the gameplay. I did finish this one. I didn't hate it, didn't turn it off immediately. It's honestly one that I could see myself firing up again, so I feel like for that reason alone it deserves a spot in Fun Bad. Now we're going to go ahead and get into the games that I like to call the tough sell games. This is a category that is worse than Fun Bad, but I think I could still recommend a lot of these games to certain people in certain situations that are willing to give some maybe flawed games a chance. And we're going to start with number 92. This is the game I covered in the LJN on NES video, and that is The Karate Kid. And this is one that has been made famous on the internet by the AVGN, among others. Honestly, I have a lot of fun with this one personally. I almost wanted to put it in Fun Bad, but I have to acknowledge the flaws in this game, especially the short length. This game is only 4 stages long, as well as the fact that starting in level 3, there's this massive typhoon that you have to contend with. You got wind knocking you back, objects flying in your face, enemies spam you constantly. Yes, it's not a perfect game, but I will say I've played the game through a couple times. I've beat it every time I end up booting it up, and I have fun with it. So for whatever that's worth, it's not a good NES game by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly you could do a lot worse than this. And another game that I covered in the Wayne's World video, number 91, we do have the NES version of Wayne's World, and this was done by Radical Entertainment and published by THQ. This game has a pretty infamous reputation, although I feel like a lot of that reputation is honestly undeserved. Yes, I'm putting it in tough sell. I don't recommend it to everybody, but I actually do prefer this to the 16-bit versions of Wayne's World. It's just a much more fair game, honestly, even though it's still got its moments. This one, I do have to warn people that it actually is a back port of a Game Boy game. They actually made the Game Boy game first and then put it on the NES and like consoleized it later. So that does explain the far from optimal visuals on this version of the game. But honestly, graphics aren't everything. And while the gameplay certainly is not one of the better games on the NES, I do find it fun. The movie tie-in does carry more than its fair share of its weight, actually. While not a perfect game, I do have fun with this one. Unfortunately, it has become quite expensive, so trying to get a copy of this is kind of difficult. Honestly, the price seems to reflect the quality, though, compared to the SNES and Genesis, because those are cheap by comparison. At number 90, we have another game made infamous by the AVGN, and that is Silver Surfer. And yes, I'm putting this in tough sell. I genuinely think this game gets more of a bad rep than it deserves. Now, that being said, it is an absolutely brutal shmup. No doubt about that. The one-hit deaths are killer. You're going to be seeing that game over screen a lot, but there are a couple nice things. There are a couple caveats. You do get a number of levels to start with right away that you can select from. So even if you do die a lot, you know, you at least get a nice variety of the different levels. Also, the game does a pretty good job of mixing things up between horizontally scrolling shooter sections as well as vertical sections, which nicely mixes things up, I think. Also, the soundtrack by Tim Fallon is excellent, as is usually the case with his soundtracks. Unfortunately, he seemed to almost always get placed on bad games, but what can you do? The soundtrack does also carry the experience a lot. And overall, I think this one is actually worth a shot if you're willing to look past the absolutely absurd difficulty. If you want a challenge, if you're into shmups and you're ready for something pretty difficult, honestly, I think this is a decent choice. At number 89, we have another Schwarzenegger game with Predator, and this one is a tough sell for really one reason alone. I think the regular 2D side-scrolling platformer sections are pretty bog standard, if not worse than what you'd expect from the NES average, so I'm not really putting it here for that, but I really actually like what they call the big mode sections, where you get this giant Arnold sprite and it basically becomes like a shooter. Honestly, sold me on this game. I am willing to play through the lame-ass platforming parts to get big mode, so that's why it goes in tough sell. If you're amused by something that stupid like I am, might be worth playing. At number 88, and I'm just now realizing this as I'm making the video, I put Back to the Future at number 88. Some things are just meant to be, right? This is a game that we covered on the LJN on NES video, and I don't have too much more to elaborate on this one, and I think a lot of people that are watching this video probably already know about this game, but if you're not aware, it's a very arcade-centric experience. It's totally absurd, totally ridiculous, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You have Marty running up the street collecting clocks, getting attacked by bees, and dudes carrying invisible panels of glass, and then you get that broken up with some mini games that are honestly of varying levels of quality. There isn't a whole lot to say here other than I actually kind of find it fun for what it is. I guess I'm a little soft when it comes to arcade style kind of silly NES games. Definitely not a great game by any means, but I've thrown this one on a few times and it honestly makes me smile every time, so gotta give it some credit for that. At number 87, we have the Three Stooges, and this is a game that's really interesting. This was done by Cinemaware, and this game made the rounds. It was on multiple computers at the time. The longevity of this game, I actually have to give it some credit. It came out on the Game Boy Advance and the PS1, way after its initial release, so gotta give it some credit there. This is pretty much a minigame compilation of a bunch of different themed games that kind of loosely are based around Three Stooges episodes. I don't know, I find this one a little bit charming, even if the minigames are pretty hit or miss. I'd say about half of them drive me up a wall and the other half are tolerable, so I usually give minigame compilations a bit of leeway, a little bit of wiggle room, and this is probably one of those cases, but I don't know, it's a silly one. I kind of enjoy it. You might enjoy it if you're into the Three Stooges or silly, dumb little minigame comps. Number 86, we have Last Action Hero, and this one took me massively by surprise, because if you guys saw either the 100 Worst SNES Games video or my Worst Genesis Licensed Game video, you know I really dislike the 16-bit version of Last Action Hero. I find those to be pretty much unplayable garbage. Some of the worst beat-em-ups I've ever played in my life. This 8-bit version, still not a great game. It's in tough sell for a reason, but comparatively, man, this game is so much more playable. I got a number of levels into this one, and while it's certainly not great by any standards, for a silly, dumb NES era beat 'em up, right? There aren't too many amazing beat 'em ups on the NES, you know, the Double Dragons and such notwithstanding. This one I actually kind of vibed with, so I gotta give it credit. Definitely better than the 16-bit versions. Unfortunately, once again, price seems to reflect that. This one is real expensive if you want to get your hands on it. Number 85, we've got Bram Stoker's Dracula, and this is one where I once again covered the 16-bit version on the Worst SNES Games video. I must admit, I do like this one a little bit more. That being said, first thing off the get, you're going to notice the visuals are very, very poor for NES standards. This game looks horrendous. I really think it looks pretty darn awful, and which is a shame because the gameplay all in all is certainly not great, but it's serviceable. It does the job. There are some annoying boss fights in this, including this shadow boss that comes out of the shadows. Honestly, more than anything, this game just feels very uninspired. Feels like a cash grab, which it pretty certainly was. At number 84 here, we've got another Simpsons game with Krusty's Funhouse, and this one I'm putting in tough sell because I think if you're into the style of puzzle type gameplay this one is serving up to you, it might be worth a look. Now, that being said, I still think there are better options for this kind of a game. Honestly, in terms of the presentation here, it does a decent enough job, but I find the Lemmings-esque getting minions to the end of a stage kind of unsatisfying. Doesn't feel like a very good use of the Simpsons license, in my opinion, and overall just falls pretty flat. At number 83 here, we've got Mag Max, and this one seems to be pretty universally hated, and I can kind of see why. Visually, it's very unimpressive, and for a horizontally scrolling shmup, it just lacks excitement. There isn't a whole lot of speed here, very slow scrolling, and it's a definite shame because I feel like there is a decent idea hidden in here with having your ship be able to be augmented with these extra ship pieces, and you become basically like this flying mechanized robot. It just needed a more exciting, cool game to go along with that mechanic. I think there was a nugget of a great idea here, and it's just bogged down by really, unfortunately, subpar execution. At number 82, we've got Bugs Bunny's Birthday Blowout, and this one kind of pains me to put in tough sell because I do like the Looney Tunes and I tend to like their games as well for the most part, but this one unfortunately feels like a half-decent 2D platformer absolutely marred and destroyed by subpar visuals and even especially more so the horrendous frame rate in this game. I don't know why this game chugs so hard, especially because it really doesn't look all that great. It really marred what was otherwise an okay experience for me. I just couldn't get over the poor performance on this one, and I think that alone puts it in tough sell tier. At number 81, we've got Fabio with Iron Sword Wizards and Warriors 2, and this is one that was developed by Rare, but this is not one of their finer moments. Unfortunately, I feel like this game does have some nuggets of promise here and there, but it is just absolutely hindered by poor platforming. For a game that is mostly a platforming game to have jump mechanics as well as collision detection and sliding off the edges of these platforms the way you do, I just found it incredibly frustrating to play, especially in the cloud stage. I had a really hard time even stomaching what I had played of it. If you're a Rare completionist, might be worth checking out, but otherwise it's probably a pass. At number 80, we have another infamous game with Mylon's Secret Castle. This seems to be one that people got roped into back in the day. I know a lot of people that ended up playing this one and were ripping their hair out because of it. This is absolutely a game that is perfectly fine, other than the fact that you are absolutely freaking need a guide or a walkthrough of some sort to make any sort of progress in this. Just very obtuse game. Otherwise, honestly, a decent little platformer. Just use game facts, use something. It'll be a lot more enjoyable. If you're willing to use a walkthrough, this might be one to check out. Number 79, we've got The Last Ninja, and this is one that I'm putting in tough sell because I feel like it is kind of a love it or hate it kind of deal. Either you're going to be into it or you're very much not. This is a game that initially came out on PCs. Because of that, it is a very methodical, very kind of stilted sort of gameplay loop, and I personally don't feel like it makes the transition to the NES very well at all, and so for that reason alone, I'm putting it in a tough sell. I don't find this one very fun to play. This game does have its fans though, and I can respect that, but definitely one of the worst on the system for me personally. And rounding off tough sell here at number 78, we have Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. And before anybody flames me for putting this RPG on this list, I am specifically talking about the NES port. And let me explain something. This game originally came out in 1981, and they had the gall to release this on the NES with basically no upgrades, no enhancements, charged full price, almost a decade later in 1990. This game is extremely text heavy. It is pretty much mostly black screens with white text. You get an occasional sprite here or there to represent something. There's like no animations. It's just incredibly primitive for an NES game. It would have been primitive for an NES game in 1985, let alone 1990. For that reason alone, it's gotta go in tough sell for me. All right, now we're getting to what I like to call the bulk bad tier. This is where the majority of the games are gonna end up, and we'll go ahead and get started with number 77 here, and that is Daydreamin' Davy. And now this is one that, once again, been covered by the AVGN. I can acknowledge, not a great game, although I do like some of the concepts that they tackled in this one. I don't think the premise itself is all that great. The biggest reason I'm putting this one at the top of bad is the fact that once you see the different areas that this game has to offer, there are actually only 3 areas in this game. There's like a medieval style area, an old west area, and then kind of a ancient Greek area. And once you see each of those 3 areas, subsequent levels just repeat those same level styles, and so it feels very samey very quickly. And in addition to the pretty subpar gameplay, there's not a whole lot to enjoy here, although I do gotta shout the game out for having a pretty funny gag in the Wild West area. There are these different buildings in the Old West town, and you get these signs that say gunsmith, blacksmith, and then it says John Smith. It made me laugh. That's part of the reason it's going at the top of bad. It won me over with that one a little bit, but yeah, otherwise deserves to be where it is. At number 76, we just covered this game in my Terminator games video. You guys should definitely check that out. So I won't spend too much time talking about this one here, but obviously we do have the NES version of the first Terminator game. Another radical entertainment disaster, this time published by Mindscape, which also did not have the greatest reputation during this era, and it shows. This is a pretty ugly platformer with some shooting elements. None of it's very well done. There's some driving sequences that are extra horrendous, and if you want to know more, check out the Terminator video. Going toward the top of bad though, because I have a bit of a Terminator bias, what can I say? At number 75 here, we have a game I covered in the LJN on NES video, and that is The Punisher. And once again, won't take up too much time talking about this one. What you really need to know is that this is a pretty substandard light gun shooter that does not have zapper support, so already big knocks for that one. Considering the gameplay style it focuses and the fact that like everybody back in the late 80s probably had an NES with a zapper, makes no sense why there's no zapper support. But also the pacing on this one is just really horrendous. Visuals are pretty gross in my opinion for such a late release. Should have looked a lot better coming out at the time, and it did. Also, there's no music other than a diegetic saxophonist that you can shoot, and it kills the music. The Punisher deserves to be toward the top of bad. It still could elicit some fun if you're willing to revel in its badness, but yeah, definitely not a good light gun shooter. 74, I have to admit this is a bit of a guilty pleasure. We've got Ghostbusters. Now, like I said, I can enjoy this game for what it is, but I also have to admit the fact that it is just a bad NES game. It just straight up is. This is a port of a game that existed previously. Activision produced this one, and it came out on a bunch of different other consoles as well as computers. years, and the NES version just did not get a very good port. Visually, it is very subpar for what you'd expect on this console. Gameplay-wise, a lot of it is just looping around the city, driving the car up, getting to the location, zapping the ghosts, getting them trapped, dumping them off, rinse, repeat. And then you get to the Gozer building where you gotta spam your way up the stairs. That is obnoxious in and of itself. And the final fight is just an absolute gauntlet in which you're forced to say on the screen, if you go to the lower part of the roof, it actually resets some of your progress. You have to deal more damage to the boss. It gets health regen if you wipe the screen away. Overall, a mess, not to mention the final end screen with multiple spelling errors in it. Clearly did not get very much care or attention put into this one. It's going toward the top of bad though, because like I said, I kind of enjoy it despite all its faults. Definitely lots of faults to mention though. At number 73, we've got Waldo back with Where's Waldo? Yes, there are actually 2 NES Waldo games. This is certainly worse than Great Waldo Search, but it's to be expected a little bit. This one came out first. Gotta say, man, just even looking at the gameplay here, it is clear that this is a rough time. I don't think I need to explain why that is, but in case you maybe need some help, the color palette and the character sprites are so low resolution. There are so few pixels designated to a lot of these characters that it's really hard to tell what you're freaking looking at. And often, more than not, Waldo will actually not be the regular white and red self because the color palette is so limited. He can end up being freaking green most of the time or blue. It makes it so much more difficult to find him. For that reason alone, I mean, it just fails at what it tries to do. Now, that being said, I still have some weird, perverse fun with it because it's just so hard to believe that it came out. Yeah, it's flawed for sure. I definitely recommend Waldo Search over this, but if you want to see what a bad Waldo game is like, maybe then it's worth checking out. At number 72, we've got an infamous one with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This one is going more toward the top of bad. I'm sure I'm going to get people yelling at me for not putting this like in the top 10 or the number 1, but frankly, I actually kind of like this game's conceit, and unfortunately, I think it kind of works both for it and against it, and let me kind of explain that a little bit here. I actually like the idea of getting put in the shoes of Dr. Jekyll. Now, why he's being attacked by every townsperson under the sun, the birds, the dogs, everything, the opera singers, I don't know. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'll give everybody some credit there. It's really nonsensical, but I do like the idea of being like kind of an underpowered protagonist and then having this alter ego that you flip to and get to be a badass in. And the only reason I have to put it in bad is because the Hyde sections are the most fun, but in order to actually make any progress in the game, you need to be playing as Jekyll. You really want to minimize your playing as Hyde, and the Hyde parts to me are the parts that are actually like really dope. You got all these like projectile fire attacks and stuff that are sick. But yeah, in order to make progress, you don't get to play that part as much as you'd like. Like I said, it works for and against itself. I think it's just a fascinating game more than anything. For that reason alone, I think it deserves a bit of a higher placement than some people might think. Number 71 here, we've got Bad Street Brawler. And if any game deserved to be in bad tier, I think it's this game. It's got bad in the freaking title. I think the devs knew it. This is honestly just a pretty silly, stupid beat 'em up. Kind of fun for what it was when I played it, but I think between the mechanics really not being very tight whatsoever and some pretty significant difficulty spikes just a few levels in, some of the enemies just frankly come out of nowhere and kick your ass like nobody's business, I think puts it in bad tier. Also, this game has Power Glove support for some reason. Number 70, Mindscape striking again with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and this one is going on the list in bad for the simple fact that it made minecarts and the Temple of Doom movie and everything just feel lame as hell. You end up going through all these exceedingly long caves with all these different chasms and doors, and you're rescuing children, and then you get to these minecart sequences with these absolutely absurd conveyor belt systems. The level design makes absolutely no sense. Gameplay is frustrating at best, downright insufferable at worst. It's just not a good time. Should have been a way better game. Honestly, Temple of Doom had so much potential to be made into a game. game, and this is what we got out of it. At number 69, we've got Matchbox Motor City Patrol, and this one disappointed me because I really thought I was gonna like this. This one essentially plays like almost like a proto GTA. You're essentially going around the city as a cop trying to catch both robbers as well as speeding violators. And while it sounds like a really unique and complex and pretty ambitious game for NES standards, once you catch a couple people speeding and give them tickets, and once you catch a couple robbers, the gameplay loop gets exceedingly repetitive, and there's just really no replay value here. That's why I gotta put it in bad. Otherwise, could have been a really interesting game if they had just mixed up some of the actual mechanics of it in some sort of meaningful way, because after about 10 minutes, you're pretty much done with it. Number 68, we've got Cliffhanger, and this is another instance of a Game Boy game ported to the NES, which explains the horrible visuals and the subpar gameplay. Need I say more? This is a money grab just through and through, trying to make money off of a huge movie of the time. Really just fails to bring any sort of enjoyment. I definitely recommend checking out the Stallone Games video I did, where I covered the Sega CD version of Cliffhanger and why that version is really unique. That's pretty much the only version of Cliffhanger I'd actually recommend anybody play. Number 67 here, we've got Barbie, and once again, High-Tech Expressions Publishing, Imagineering developing, and we got another Imagineering joint that just is a platformer that honestly just sucks the joy out of the room. It's one of those games. Barbie is, I don't know, I almost wonder if they did this on purpose, because Barbie is very stiff to control, and I almost wonder, I feel like I'm giving the game too much credit here, but I almost have to wonder if it was a deliberate choice by Imagineering to make it feel like you were controlling like a plastic doll. That is the only way I can give this game any sort of credit, is the fact that maybe it plays bad on purpose, right? That's pretty much all I gotta say about this one. It's freaking Barbie. It's 67. It deserves to be here. At numbers 66 and 65 respectively, we've got Hook as well as Peter Pan and the Pirates, and it's kind of perfect that these games ended up side by side with one another, obviously being based on the Peter Pan franchise, the classic story, and both of these games do a horrible job of distilling any sort of the fun imagination, the wonderment of Peter Pan. These are both just what I think of when I think of bad NES platforming games. You've got horrible visuals, you've got bad level design, you've got functional at best controls when they feel like it. Both of these games actually have collectathon kind of elements where you actually do have to collect certain objects in order to be able to get to the next stage. Just annoying all around. Captures none of the wonderment of the Peter Pan license on either one of these. These are both a fat pass for me personally. At number 64, we have Dick Tracy, and this one hurts to put in bad because I actually kind of do like some of what this game tries to do. I think a lot of people get confused by this one. They get thrown in the car in the city and don't know where they're supposed to be going, but the game actually, if you're paying attention, is pretty good at telling you where you need to go next. I wouldn't mind having to drive through the city if you actually, once you got to your location, your destination, if you actually got to do anything that was resembling fun. Side-scrolling slowly through these levels and shooting enemies, it's just so lackluster. If there was a reason to be chasing around and finding these clues, it might be a little more satisfying, but as it stands, pretty bad NES game. At number 63, we got Dash Galaxy in the Alien Asylum, and this is another one that kind of stings to have to put in bad tier, but I just have to be honest with myself. A lot of these games, there are neat ideas, and I can see nuggets of what the devs were trying to go for, and this feels like one of those instances. This one, essentially, you get a combination of puzzle gameplay as well as platforming. The puzzle gameplay is pretty simple. You're put in these top-down kind of rooms, and you're basically just pushing blocks around in order to get to these exits, and then once you reach these doors, you get put in these side-scrolling platforming sequences. To me, the platforming is where shit hits the fan here. The jumping in this game especially just feels like moon gravity. Your character is so obnoxiously slow. Again, while there are some nuggets of neat ideas here, the platforming gameplay is just so substandard that it has to be put in bad here. I think there was some potential here, but Beam Software unfortunately squandered it in this case. At number 62, we've got Ghoul School, and this is another Imagineering joint. They just can't seem to steer steer clear from making bad games. This is another one that I really tried to give some decent time. I had played it over the course of a couple different sessions, trying to get further into it, but you'll notice very quickly, I mean, this is just a pretty standard side-scrolling, I guess, beat 'em up if you want to call it that. It's probably the closest thing it gets to like a genre comparison, but it's just really an unfortunate release. You're going through these school halls and they never seem to end. And I can tell you, as somebody that played probably more of this than I should have, even once you get to areas like the gym, it doesn't get a whole lot better. I really tried to give this one the benefit of the doubt, and unfortunately it just did not deliver. At 61 and 60 respectively, we've got Home Alone as well as Home Alone 2 Lost in New York. Yes, I do feel like these games are pretty comparable enough to be put right next to each other. Now, I am giving the first Home Alone the slight edge because it's at least a little bit different in terms of what you'd expect. It actually tries to kind of follow at least the last maybe, you know, half an hour of the first film, in which you're Kevin running around trying to keep Harry and Marv from stealing everything out of the house and just inflicting tons of damage to them, which should have been awesome, and in fact is awesome in the Genesis version of the game, which I do want to cover in a future video. But this NES version has you going around the house collecting items to drop. They temporarily stun Harry and Marv, but not for very long, and really just the goal of the game in this one is to survive 20 minutes, which sounds easy, but Harry and Marv like to split up and try to corner you, and as much as I tried to get through this game, I always got cornered after 3 or 4 minutes and did not feel the need to see or tolerate any more of it. Now, Home Alone 2, I also covered in the 100 Worst NES Games video. It has a lot of the same problems because it's basically the same game. In fact, it's a little bit worse because it's on weaker hardware, but the overall conceit is the same. It does absolutely nothing to redeem itself. I don't think there's a single good version of Home Alone 2. Never will be. At number 59, we have Dr. Chaos, and this one is disappointing for a few reasons. First off, I mean, just the cover art here is insane and awesome, but once you get into the game, you realize that there isn't really a whole lot to it. The side-scrolling gameplay, going from door to door, really is just subpar at best here. The one thing of note I can give this one is the fact that once you enter rooms, you get kind of this pseudo first person kind of 3D dungeon crawling type mode, but the problem is there's just nothing to it. You look around these small cramped rooms, there aren't a whole lot of items. It just feels like a tech demo more than anything, like there was plans for some really ambitious game and instead we just got whatever Dr. Chaos is. A very disappointing experience. At number 58, once again, we've got The Simpsons back with Bartman versus Radioactive Man, and Imagineering once again coming out swinging and totally missing. Now, there is another Simpsons game a little bit further down in the video. You'll have to wait for that one. This one, I will say, is at least a little bit more action-centric, and it just simply focuses on the platforming, but as we know, Imagineering was not capable of doing very much of anything very well, and the platforming here is just not good. The level design just seems to go on forever. In fact, this first stage in the junkyard just goes on and on and on, and there's very little to do other than just jump around and pray. Yeah, just another Imagineering joint that hurts. At 57 here, we've got Hudson Hawk, and this one's really strange because you got like bobblehead, I guess, Bruce Willis running around, and the game just throws so much at you right at the beginning. Almost immediately, a dog chases after you and rips you to shreds. You've got this box puzzle that you have to deal with going up this elevator, trying to slide 2 boxes on top of each other so you can jump these window sills to get inside. Once you're inside, you got these cameras shooting lasers at you. It's so much, so fast, and it's very overwhelming and just frankly unfair, and it's definitely just one that immediately turns you off. I tried to get further in and it doesn't get a whole lot better. At number 56, we've got another one that I covered in the LJ and on NES video, and that is WWF Steel Cage Challenge. This was far and away the most disappointing WrestleMania game of the 4 that released on the NES, and that mainly has to do with a combination of bad frame rate and animations, as well as just overall bad visuals. The gameplay here is serviceable at best, but all of the other WrestleMania games trounce this one in pretty much every aspect, so there really is no reason to play this one, and the Steel Cage gameplay really does not help save this one even slightly. Misses a lot of what makes wrestling wrestling and the culture of wrestling fun and engaging, and it's just definitely a disappointing experience. At 55 here, we've got Funhouse, and this one almost to me epitomizes what makes for just a bland as hell, middle of the road bad NES game. There is just nothing here that keeps the player wanting to play past a few stages. Essentially, you're going around grabbing these objects on the maps, a lot of which you have to hit in a certain order in order to clear the stage. You get a key at the end, and it's rinse and repeat. It really just is like running around, grabbing these checkpoints, and you're done. After a few stages of it, there's really nothing that keeps you wanting to play. It's just abhorrently boring. At number 54 here, we've got Spider-Man in Return of the Sinister Six, and this is another game that we covered on the LJN on NES tier list, so if you want more in-depth thoughts, you can check that video out. But to be brief here, this is just a very mediocre superhero game, certainly far from the worst that you could get on the platform, but definitely not the best, even close. Mainly it comes down to just boring side-scrolling levels in which you mainly just want to just avoid enemies because it's just quicker. Dealing with the combat in this is just a nuisance, which, you know, a game about punching the shit out of bad dudes, it should be fun to do that, and in this case it just isn't. Some horrible boss designs and laughably bad ones at that, and then also just poor web slinging implementation that is more frustrating than it should be fun. Unfortunately, all adds up to be not a very good time. And the LJN continues with number 53. We got Back to the Future Part 2 and 3, and once again covered this one in more detail, but to be brief, this is one that plays really like a discount Mario in terms of the actual platforming. There are some decent ideas in terms of time travel mechanics, but the way in which they're done, having to grab objects and place them in random parts of different maps at different time periods, the game does not a good job at all explaining these mechanics. To play this game without a walkthrough would probably be a nightmare, so for that reason alone, this goes in bad. I like some of the ideas here, but the execution is just marred to hell. At number 52, we've got a game called Castilian, and this is a game that came out on multiple different platforms and seems to have been at least moderately successful if they were going to keep porting it, and I can't necessarily see why. Maybe visually it's a little impressive in terms of the way it kind of does this pseudo fake 3D. Visually it's not bad, but man, that is pretty much where the positives end here. The gameplay is absolutely frustrating, very slow to control, just sluggish, which is ironic because he plays a frog. It's just really horrendous. You got these like photons going around the castle here that will hit you. It's harder to dodge than you'd hope because of course it is. Just not a very fun time, unfortunately. Number 51 here, LJN strikes again. We got the incredible Crash Dummies, and the only thing real nice I can say about this one is at least it is better in my opinion than the 16-bit Crash Dummies game. That really isn't saying much. This is just a bland, uninspired 2D platformer that leaves a lot to be desired. So much potential could have been done with this franchise and a game based off the franchise, but they just squandered any sort of potential that was there. If you want more detailed thoughts, check out the LJN video. And before we get into the back half of this list here, first of all, I want to thank those that are still watching at this point in the video. I realize these videos are quite long and really appreciate all the viewership on these videos. You guys make YouTube worth doing. I also want to extend a huge thanks to my Twitch supporters that allow me to stream full time and make getting all this gameplay footage possible. Is absolutely wild. I appreciate all the support over there. If you'd like to keep the YouTube videos rolling and want to support just beyond watching, which is more than enough, there is a join button on the channel. There are a few different tiers you can join, with the higher tiers getting access to some exclusive videos, in addition to all the fun normal perks like subscriber badges and emotes and all that good stuff. Help support these videos, allow me to continue doing this full time and cover this insane amount of ground that we tend to do on these 100 lists. So thank you guys for watching. Let's get back to it. And coming in at number 50 here, we got Imagineering once again. Man, these guys were just the kings of bad NES games. We got Attack of the Killer Tomatoes here, and this is one based off the pre-existing cartoon franchise. Again, Imagineering taking a license, using it for some cheap bucks, and just throwing away any sort of potential that this franchise had for a good video game, and basically churning out a product. It absolutely feels that way. Really not much else to say here. It's freaking Imagineering. And might as well get 49 and 48 out of the way because they're also Imagineering, dude. I'm telling you, these guys were insane. insane. We got Swamp Thing as well as The Simpsons Bart versus the Space Mutants. Swamp Thing, I don't have too much to say about other than just the platforming in this is atrocious, very frustrating. You get hit by everything. Swamp Thing takes damage in the freaking water. It's stupid. And then Simpsons is almost even more offensive because we've seen that they could do better Simpsons games earlier in the video. And this is far and away the most annoying one because the whole conceit is that you're going through these levels and for some reason the aliens want to take purple objects from Earth, and so the way to keep the aliens out is to spray paint the purple objects red so that they're not purple objects anymore. It's just stupid. The skateboarding's bad as well. Platforming is atrocious. The enemy patterns are obnoxious. Overall, just a borderline insufferable game. Doesn't quite get there, but it's real close. At number 47, we have The Hunt for Red October, and this is High Expressions once again disappointing us. This is one that honestly amazes and perplexes me because you would think a game about piloting a submarine and shooting rockets at other enemies and projectiles would be sick as hell, and somehow they make it boring as shit. I find this one really dull and boring to play. It could have been so much better than it is. Yeah, somehow they made what could have been like an awesome action game just feel like another phony cash grab. At number 46, we've got our pal Alfred Chicken, and I covered this one in the 100 Worst SNES Games video. This one did not fare much better. This is pretty much the same game on weaker hardware. I don't understand why this was a mascot that got multiple games across multiple platforms. I don't know who was buying this. At best, it is a serviceable platformer with just some obnoxious level design and frustrating controls and jumping mechanics. I just can't recommend this one at all. At 45, we've got The Adventures of Gilligan's Island, and while I don't necessarily dislike the conceit of this, I think trying to make Gilligan's Island an adventure game is actually quite a noble attempt. The execution here is just real flawed, real busted. It becomes very quickly a devolution into just fetch questing, and the other thing that is really obnoxious about this game is that your pal Skipper constantly gets lost from you, and you end up having to use ropes to pull him back. If you run out of ropes, you gotta go find them somehow. It's just having to babysit this AI companion that can't seem to follow you makes this one a lot worse than it otherwise needed to be. At number 44, we have Tiger Heli, and this is one that, once again, feels like just an absolute disappointment. I don't think having a helicopter-based shmup is a bad idea at all. In fact, I think if done right, could be super awesome. Unfortunately, this is not the case, and this game is marred by significant performance and sprite flicker issues. The frame rate is abysmal, especially in a genre like shmups where you want fast, fluid responsiveness. This has none of that, and the sprite flicker is to the point where it is actually distracting. It is really hard to play this without just focusing on the fact that the enemies are invisible half the damn time, and it unfortunately makes what is a decent concept a pretty rough time. At numbers 43, 42, and 41, I'm just gonna get these three out of the way because they're all sports games. We got Harlem Globetrotters, MLB Baseball, and Wayne Gretzky's Hockey. These are all toward the bottom of bad because they aren't quite insufferable. These are perfectly playable games. It's just there are so many better options for all these sports on this console. These are just very lackluster in terms of visuals, graphics, gameplay, sound design. I mean, basically every metric you can judge a game off of. These games are technically serviceable, but again, when there's so many other options on the platform for sports games, I don't know why you'd take any of these. They certainly aren't the worst on the platform, but they're toward the bottom of the barrel. And rounding off our lump bad tier here at number 40, we have Color a Dinosaur. This one goes at the bottom of bad because it frankly just fails to do well what it set out to do, and that is to be a video coloring book. For those that are not aware of this game, basically you get an assortment of 20 different dinosaurs that you can color with the help of your Nintendo Entertainment System. And the simple fact of the matter is that while maybe not insufferable, I would rather just use an actual coloring book if I were a kid. This is such a poor way of enjoying the art of art, if you will. Every time you select a color and try to fill in part of the dinosaur, it slowly has to draw in the color, and you just have to sit there and wait while it does all the work drawing everything in. Why would you need this when you could just buy a coloring book for like 50 cents and call it a day? This is an absolute waste of a cartridge. I don't know why it was produced. Strap in, it's about to get rough. We are now getting into what I call the insufferable tier, and these are games that are beyond just bad. Like, these ones actually start to hurt a little bit to play. They make you question why you like video games as a medium in general, and we're gonna start with number 39 here with the Blues Brothers. I had to cover the 16-bit version for our SNES video, and I genuinely think this one is far worse for a couple reasons. First of all, the level design, even more nonsensical than the 16-bit version. Even compounding on that, the movement in this game is very slippery, it's very fast, it's just very twitchy, and just frankly, when you combine the level design and the movement, it is just a really horrendous platformer to try and play. Also, just a horrible use of the Blues Brothers license. I mean, it has very little to do with the film whatsoever, so strange one at the best. At number 38, we have Dirty Harry, and yes, for some reason, they made a NES game based off the Clint Eastwood film, and this one is just a head-scratcher for multiple reasons. A lot of people that play this never even get anywhere because the game just does a horrible job at trying to explain anything, and in fact, you'll find very quickly in the game, even just a few minutes, you are forced to do things that no one on the planet would guess to do. You have to talk to this man in a certain building in order to switch suits with him so you can progress to the next level. It's just so cryptic, so insane. The actual gunplay mechanics here are horrible. Just absolutely horrendous at the best of times, and it's just an absolute mess, and man, just a wild one that even exists. I don't know what they were thinking with this one. At number 37, we have Athena, and this one is kind of infamous, although less infamous than some of this dev's other work. This is done by Micronix, and we're going to talk about them a little bit more later as we get further down Insufferable here. But this is actually one of the better games they released on the NES, which, as you can imagine, being an Insufferable isn't saying a whole lot. This one visually is a definite misfire. On top of that, I mean, the gameplay here at the best of times is tolerable, but man, even especially some of the bosses here, they are designed in such a way that there really is no strategy. You just have to kind of tank them and try and deal damage as fast as possible. There's no strategy. It's just frustrating in a game where you have limited hit points to feel like the game is almost taunting you, and this is definitely one of those games. At number 36, we've got Ren and Stimpy Buckaroos, and this franchise just keeps wanting to hurt me. For those that aren't aware, I covered all 4 of the Super Nintendo releases in the 100 Worst SNES Games video. Yes, all 4 of the ones that came out on that platform were bottom 100 worthy. This one is no exception. This one's going in Insufferable. This one is just frustrating because it jumps you right in, and in the first stage, you are expected to use a spring as Stimpy to get Ren to jump over this teleporter that's trying to zap you, and then you're thrown into this horrible shmup sequence that is just absolutely garbage, and then you get pushed into this Old West setting, and things really just don't get better. This is just a horrible 2D platformer, really painful to play, and Ren and Stimpy once again trying to creep their way into my nightmares. At number 35, we've got a game called Mystery Quest, and this is one that honestly, I think on first look, if you're thinking it's like an early Famicom game, it might look passable, but this is a 1987 release, so I think visually it is definitely a step behind what you'd hope for from the NES at that point. And also the Achilles heel here, and the one that sold me on putting this in Insufferable, is that you'll see you have a vitality meter in the upper right, and that vitality meter is your health, but it goes down like a timer clock for the level. Naturally, as you progress through the level, you're just losing health the entire time. I don't think I've ever seen another NES game do that, and for that reason alone, that just makes this a absolute horrible mistake of a development choice. I don't know what they were thinking. It really makes an otherwise okay game pretty tough to stomach. At number 34 here, we've got Muppet Adventure and Chaos at the Carnival, and this is a minigame compilation. Normally, I am pretty lenient toward minigame comps. I usually like the variety of different gameplay styles you get to enjoy. Unfortunately, this one I gotta go hard on because it's a minigame comp, and yet it does none of the minigames even close to well. You've got a rafting minigame that's an absolute mess. You've got like this bumper car game where you're going from left to right. There's just obstacles littering everywhere, and it's impossible to avoid taking damage. And then there's this maze game that I really want to hammer on, because this is the longest maze style game I have ever played. I sat and played this for probably at least 25-30 minutes, thinking that it would eventually end, and it never did. And I have no idea why they'd make these other mini games decently bite-sized, and then arguably the most boring game. I mean, maybe the most playable, I guess, but easily the most boring game, the longest mini game, just makes absolutely no sense. I had to turn this one off because I can't take that much maze bullshit. At number 33, we have Phantom Fighter, and this is another one that hurts putting where I had to, but I just gotta go with my gut here. This is a game from 1988, and I think off the get here, the visuals are definitely subpar for 88 standards. I think graphics on the Nintendo had come a long way in those few years, and visually it's definitely very much a disappointment. Not only that, but I really liked the concept of going through these towns and fighting these enemies one-on-one, but simply put, the fighting game mechanics here are just simply not good. I tried my absolute best to get more than a few fights in, but man, after the first couple, the game just ratchets the difficulty up insanely hard. I wasn't getting much of anywhere, so for those reasons, gotta put this one in Insufferable. At number 32, another LJN game, we got Beetlejuice. I'm gonna be brief about this one, but unfortunately, this is probably one of Rare's worst on the platform. It's a shame because, once again, this property could have lended itself to a really great game, but you end up having to stomp a bunch of bugs to get these power-ups that are very limited use. I mean, these are required power-ups in order to further progress through these stages. The power-ups go away like absolutely nothing, so you're back to stomping bugs. I mean, it's like, it's grinding for an RPG in a freaking 2D platformer. It's ridiculous, and also the boss fights are stupidly easy once you know what to do. Just all around a poor showing from an otherwise pretty decent dev most of the time. This was definitely a disappointment. At number 31, we have Karate Champ, and this is one that I might get some flack for because I know this game has its fans. I just don't think it's a very good fighting game at all. This game feels incredibly archaic, even for NES standards, and I don't think this is one that, unless you're nostalgic for, I can really see myself recommending to anybody trying to get into NES or trying some new games on the Nintendo, especially in 2024. I think this one is just a hard pass all around. Coming in at number 30, we have Indiana Jones back again with The Last Crusade, and I need to be very clear here. We are talking about the Ubisoft version of this game. There are two versions of Last Crusade on NES with almost identical artwork, and the only way to tell is who published who. And the title version is actually a halfway decent game. Unfortunately, the Ubisoft one is not, and this is actually a port of the game that I last covered on our Genesis licensed video. This is pretty much the same game, but all across the board worse because it's on weaker hardware. The visuals, the color palette in particular, is incredibly limited. I know the NES had a limited palette, but this makes it look like it's basically incapable of more than just a few colors. It is an ugly looking game, and a lot of the platforming critiques I had in the Genesis version are even just more exacerbated here. This is a really rough game to try and play. At number 29, we've got The Jungle Book, and this is an incredibly late release on the NES, and yet again, we have another Game Boy back port to the console. Honestly, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think this would be a half bad platformer, but the absolute Achilles heel here is the fact that you are required to basically play like it's a collectathon. You need to get these 10 fruits throughout the level, and there are only 10, so you have to find every single one, and that means you might have to backtrack all the way through the level if you missed one. And in fact, even made worse, even in the first level, the end of the stage is actually impassable. What I mean is you basically swing over to the end of the stage, and it is impossible to go back and try to backtrack if you missed one of the earlier collectathon items. So you are basically forced to reset the game if you end up getting to the end of the stage without getting everything. Super frustrating, to say the least. At numbers 28 and 27 respectively, we've got Ikari Warriors 1 and 2, and like I said, we we're gonna get back to Micronics here, and these are the games that really make people hate Micronics on the NES, because Ikari Warriors was a classic, fun arcade game, just run and gun action, good time, and they managed to bungle up both of these NES ports with poor performance, bad sprite flickering, unsatisfying gameplay. They're hack job ports, unfortunately, and I'm only giving Ikari Warriors 1 the slight edge because at least it has the ABBA continues code, so if you wanted to suffer your way through it, you absolutely could with not too much of an issue. But Ikari Warriors 2 does not have that same luxury, and you've got limited lives and continues, and you ain't getting very far, let me tell you. At number 26, we've got the infamous Immortal, and this is one that I had to put on this list. I'm saying it's insufferable because honestly, this game feels like the devs wanting to take the piss out of the player because everything wants to kill you. There's beginner traps everywhere. It just frankly feels like a test to see if the player is gonna enjoy video games after this experience, because honestly, if I got this as a kid, I probably would have given up the hobby. I'm not even kidding. Like, this is just a rough game. I do like some of the visuals here. I must say, I think it looks better on the 16-bit platforms. It doesn't play any better, but at least it looks better. This game deserves the reputation it's got. I'm just gonna leave it there, be done. At number 25, we have the Defenders of Dynatron City, and this one is insufferable because at first glance, it looks like it's just gonna be an okay standard kind of beat 'em up situation, and then as you continue to play, you realize that these streets all have names, but like they look all the same, and it becomes very clear that like you need to be finding objects in order to progress, and you quickly realize that this is one of the most obtuse beat 'em ups you will ever play in your life. Most beat 'em ups are pretty linear in nature. This is the opposite of linear, and it does a horrible job explaining any of what you're supposed to do. Not to mention the beat 'em up elements really aren't very well polished whatsoever. So all around, this one is a fat pass for me. I don't recommend it to anybody. At numbers 24 and 23 respectively, we've got Who Framed Roger Rabbit as well as Bill and Ted's Excellent Video Game Adventure, and these games honestly piss me off even just thinking about them, so I'm gonna let my past self from the LJN and NES video play for these because I really don't want to say any more about these ones. And the reason I'm kind of bundling these two together is because in a lot of ways they annoy me for the same reasons. Both of them are extremely cryptic. They don't really tell you what your gameplay loop is supposed to look like or what you're supposed to be doing. Now, yes, they do try to explain some of these things in the manual, but the gameplay is just not there. These are just horribly cryptic games, and you know, for those that are going to be like, well, you should read the manual or you should watch a walkthrough. I'm sorry, if I need to do that to understand core basic elements of progression, you've lost me. You've absolutely lost me. That shit's insufferable. I can't stand it. At numbers 22 and 21 respectively, we've got Jordan versus Bird 1-on-1 as well as Magic Johnson's Fast Break, and these are just really rough sports games. I'm just gonna be honest, the NES did not fare well when it came to basketball games in particular. These are some of the worst examples. Just really archaic, absolutely antiquated feeling games, even at the time. These do not feel like Nintendo games in any sense of the word, and it's a shame that they were even greenlit and put on this platform. Again, not a ton of great basketball options on the system, but surely you can do better than these two. At number 20 here, we're starting a bit of an RPG block here with a few games, starting with Hide Light, and this one I think is infamous for every reason here. Not only is this a 1989 release on NES that looks more like an early Famicom release, visually it is very disappointing for the era. Not only that, but also just the core gameplay here is fundamentally flawed. I mean, honestly, an action RPG in and of itself, there are some action RPGs I actually really love, but this is certainly not one of them, because when your main method of attack literally just comes down to kind of just walking into enemies with your sword sticking out and hoping you deal damage, I'm sorry, that is not satisfying. It doesn't make you feel like a hero. It doesn't make you feel like some brave adventurer. It just makes you feel like a freaking fool, and I think that was the point, because they fooled you into buying this damn game. At number 19 here, we've got Times of Lore, and this is an RPG that seems to be pretty much for forgotten to time, and I think, unfortunately, that is for good reason. Now, the game starts and opens with enough promise, but admittedly, maybe it's a little generic in terms of the RPG tropes it goes with for the story. But once you get into the overworld, things really start to fall apart. First of all, the color palette is really rough. Graphically, just in general, it's not great. The frame rate and performance is quite disappointing, and pair that with some of the pathway and walkway designs, some of these cobblestone kind of paths, the scrolling is actually really unsettling and kind of made me a little queasy just playing it. It actually started to get me a little in terms of the visuals. It was actually kind of throwing me off and making me a little sick. For those reasons, that puts this one in Insufferable, a rough RPG to say the least. At number 18 here, we have Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Heroes of the Lance, and this is one that really hurt because honestly, Dungeons and Dragons I feel like just deserves freaking better. Now, there are a few different Dungeons and Dragons games on the NES. As far as I can tell, the other ones are reasonably serviceable enough, but this one is just absolutely killer. It is another action RPG, and once again, the action comes down to just blindly slashing these enemies. Further compounding the issues with this one is the fact that navigation is an absolute struggle. The way that these screens are laid out and the way that the doors coincide with one another and how you enter and exit screens, it's just so easy to get lost and lose your way. And they try to give you a compass on the UI here, but it is absolutely of no value, and it's just a pain to try and get anywhere here. Definitely don't recommend this one. Coming in at number 17 here, we've got a game called Stealth ATF by Activision, and honestly, for my money, from everything I've played on the Nintendo when it comes to like flight sim games, I think this is probably the worst flight combat game on the platform. The visuals and the performance are the two absolutely abhorrent aspects of this game. It just runs like absolute trash, and I would bet anybody that thinks Top Gun is some horrible NES game, play some Stealth ATF and get back to me. I think you'll realize Top Gun is actually quite a better game than you might be giving it credit. And rounding off Insufferable tier here at number 16, we have NFL football. And this is another LJN joint. I covered this one in the video, but simply put, the graphics here are really closer to what I'd expect from like an Intellivision game than an NES game. Also, you deal with basically switching from the overhead view to kind of a more zoomed in view when you're going, especially to pass the football. Every time it cuts between these different vantage points, you get a flash of a green screen that is like at least a second or two long, and it does this every time it has to switch the camera angles. It totally breaks any sort of flow of the game, and not only that, but the plays actually, you cannot select in the game. You actually had to have a separate pamphlet that show you all the plays, and then you'd input them via a controller, D-pad, and button combination. Just all around a poor showing for NES football. When you got Tecmo Bowl, why would you ever bother with this? And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are into the final 15. And these are games that I am calling unplayable trash. I think none of these are worth anyone's time. And we're going to start here with number 15, the infamous Super Pitfall. And it is a shame to play this one, considering how much ground the original Pitfall and Pitfall 2 broke on the Atari 2600. This just deserved a better game on the NES than it got, especially because the NES became like the name in 2D platforming. There were so many great 2D platformers, and Pitfall kind of paved the way, and yet this is what we get on the NES. Extremely disappointing on all fronts. I don't know why this got the seal of quality, and that'll be the same for these next 14. At number 14 here, we've got Kid Cool and the Quest for the 7 Wonder Herbs. Yeah, what a name here. This is an absolutely atrocious release. First of all, this came out in 1988, and just by looking at it, I would have guessed this was like an early release for the Famicom in 84 or 85. I mean, it just graphically is so behind the times, and on top of that, you have some of the absolute worst 2D platforming momentum mechanics that I have ever seen in my life. Kid Cool starts so slow and it takes so much time to get up to any sort of speed that it makes this game an absolute nightmare to try and play nowadays. We got so spoiled for platformers on the NES. To try and play something like this, especially nowadays, is pretty much a no-go. At number 13 here, we've got winter games, and this one goes in Unplayable Trash to me, frankly, just out of principle. I think it is offensive that this only has 4 events. Now, if you're not aware, winter games came out on a bunch of different platforms, and essentially it's a winter kind of sporting mini game compilation, right? Most of the other versions of the game have like 7, 8, 10 events. This one only has 4, and I would say of the 4 that are included here, only 2 of them I could even have any sort of enjoyment for, and we're talking like maybe 1 or 2 loops, and the other 2 absolutely annoyed the hell out of me. First, you have the hot dog aerials, which somehow I was actually kind of okay at, but the event is like 15-20 seconds and you're done. Then you have a speed skating event that I tried multiple times to win. I could never figure out exactly how I was supposed to mash A and B in order to beat the AI. It seemed almost impossible. In the figure skating event, I was able to get a couple twists and twirls and things, but I couldn't really score any points. And then lastly, there's a bobsledding game, which to me was the most playable of the 4. But even then, I've played other games that do that sort of thing way better. So all in all, this is just a horrible slapdash collection of just a few winter sports themes mini games, and none of them are any good whatsoever. Coming in at number 12 here, we've got Superman by Kemco, and this one falls into a lot of the other traps that a lot of these games on this list have. Visuals that are way behind the time for the release, obtuse, obnoxious gameplay, and on top of that, we just have the simple fact that they make Clark Kent, aka Superman, an absolute bitch. I'm sorry, I have to say it. He is an absolute pushover in this game. That is the issue with a lot of these superhero games. How do you make a superhero function in a video game, especially in the NES era where games were considered to need to be a little harder, you know, for the rental market, make sure kids had to keep coming back to get the game. How do you make it so that people keep playing? Well, you just make Superman a goddamn wimp. Basically make him insufferable to play as, and congrats, they did it, because I never want to play this game again. Coming in at number 11 here, we've got Cool World, and this is, once again, no surprise, the SNES version made the SNES list. Who would have guessed the NES version making it here? This is probably the most obtuse game I would say I've played on the NES, and it is exemplified by the first stage in which you're supposed to get into this bar, but there are these bouncers blocking the doors so you can't get in. So what do? You'd think, oh, I don't know, maybe throw bombs to attack them, get them out of the way. Nope. You have to find a trash can off to the side of one of the buildings. You have to shove it down the street to the door where they're sitting, and you have to get the lid off so that the stench, the aroma starts to ruminate. And then that will make them leave their guard post, and then you can get into the bar. And then once you're in, it gets even worse. It is the craziest first, I guess, boss fight, if you want to call it that, in gaming history, I would say. The conceit is that you have to get up on the bar, and then you jump over to these platforms on the left, but there's these electric waves zapping you, and you got the bartender throwing bottles. It is absolutely insufferable, and this is just the first stage. It is unbelievable how insane this game is, and yeah, had to be put in Unplayable Trash just for that. All right, we're getting to the final top 10 here, and at number 10, we've got Conan, and this is an interesting one because I remember playing this one a few years back and thinking it actually wasn't that bad. I don't know what past Kyle was on because I couldn't stand any of this game this time around. Honestly, we could talk about the fact that the visuals aren't very good. We could talk about the fact that the collision detection is funky, but essentially the goal of the game, a lot of it predicates around getting these item upgrades and using said items to defeat enemies and progressing. And you need these items. To grab these items, you would think, okay, I just duck down and grab the item. Well, here's the problem. The controls in this game are actually dumb. They are actually stupid. They are some of the worst controls I've ever seen. How would you think to duck in this game, right? Like most other NES games, you know, just press down, right? Just press down, it's easy. Down alone does basically a long jump, which in and of itself is barely needed. So why it's just mapped to down is beside me. I have no idea. In order to duck, you have to press down and A, and you have to press them very specifically and very intently at the same time. If you're just like slightly off and you press down slightly before A, you're gonna do the long jump. And I had so many instances during the recording of this footage where I meant to duck and instead I did the stupid stupid ass long jump and just launched myself into oblivion. That alone makes this game absolutely intolerable and ruins what could have been like maybe just a bad game and makes it unplayable trash. Coming in at number 9 here, we have Xenophobe by Sunsoft, and this one was a severe disappointment because usually I like Sunsoft stuff. I actually just recently beat Gremlins 2 on the NES by them. I really like a lot of their output. Obviously the Batman game they did as well is fantastic. They had a lot of good NES games, but unfortunately they had some shit. This is probably their worst release. We could talk about the gameplay being pretty bad. We could talk about the visuals once again being an absolute travesty for the time in which it released, but I think we gotta discuss the elephant in the room and the fact that more than half the screen is not dedicated to play area. If you're playing this game solo, they did not fix the game so that you got most of the screen and you have just this dorky Xenophobe logo bouncing around like the DVD logo on the bottom half of the screen, taking up a bunch of real estate that could have been used for gameplay. It wasn't a good game before, and that just sends it over the edge, and I think it deserves unplayable trash for that. At number 8 here, I would have what I honestly consider the worst sports game on the NES. This is like the Bill Lambert's combat basketball of the NES, and we have Cyberball. And why is this game so bad? Well, first of all, the visuals are absolutely abhorrent for any era of NES, but the kicker is the fact that this came out in 1992. I don't know who thought this was acceptable for NES standards, especially in the 90s. I mean, this is just an absolute train wreck of a release, and it honestly doesn't get any better when you go to try to play it. The frame rate is rough, the controls are awkward at best. This is just all around an absolute travesty of an NES game, and I'm surprised this even made it to retail shelves. At number 7, we have Captain Planet and the Planeteers, and I would say even more so than Superman here. This commits the absolute cardinal sin of making a game about superheroes. You should be badass, it should be fun, you should feel OP, and you just feel like the weakest game protagonist ever. You start out with these shmup sequences that are side-scrolling, that are insufferable in their own right, but if you're somehow able to stick through with it and try to get through it, you end up rewarded with these basically flying sequences where you're the titular Captain Planet and you're working your way through these levels, trying to dodge obstacles. It's just actually a sad time. While playing it, I could feel part of my gamer soul dying a little bit inside. It's just absolutely sucks any sort of joy that is supposed to come out of the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's the opposite of entertainment. At number 6, we have the infamous Deadly Towers. I think this is no shock to anybody that knows the Nintendo library and could have guessed this was gonna make it into the top 10. Is there too much to say about this one that hasn't already been said? Not really. Graphically, this is absolutely abhorrent. The gameplay, if you even want to call it that, it's a joke. It's just an absolute joke. The enemies are just insufferable to try and deal with. You got these weird tether balls attacking you in certain levels. The level design, just absolutely nonsensical. There's no sense of direction. Your objective is who the hell knows. I don't think anybody ever plays this game to get far enough to really figure it out. I can't recommend this one even slightly. This one deserves all the reputation it has. And I gotta give my hats off to Imagineering. Their worst game only managed to be number 5. We've got The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, and I genuinely think this is Imagineering's worst game in just about every possible facet. I mean, we're talking the visuals. To me, this is MS Paint visuals personified. Also, you have some horrible collision detection, frustrating platforming controls, not to mention some of the worst possible music that I may have heard on the entire system. I mean, this is some terrible stuff. Also, when you try to switch to Rocky, the flying controls are absolutely abhorrent. Just all around a misfire on every possible level. Imagineering's worst game, number 5. At number 4 here, we have the infamous port of Dragon's Lair for the NES. Now, for those that aren't aware, Dragon's Lair actually started off as a arcade Laserdisc game, and it was essentially just a QTE game. It was really pushing the fact that it could use Laserdisc technology and give you really fantastic cartoon visuals running off of a Laserdisc. It looked incredible at the time, and unfortunately, because of that QTE style gameplay, a lot of the console ports tried to adopt that kind of limited input style of gameplay. SNES, honestly, I think did it a little bit better. This NES version is absolutely brutal, and a lot of people that ever try this game out actually never make it past the first screen. It is that stilted, that awkward to control. I was able to make it a few screens into the game, but it took some considerable doing, and I felt like I was fighting the mechanics and the controls of this game the entire way. A lot of it just comes down to memorization and getting into this jank zone that I honestly don't recommend most people get into. I mean, I like my jank, but like, this is too far for most humans on this planet. I don't think I can recommend this game to pretty much anybody. At number 3, we have one that I don't think a lot of people are aware of, but that is Monster Truck Rally. And this one goes so high on the list because frankly, it is a racing game that I literally could not play. Before anybody says like, oh, you have to know about the shifting and the higher gears, I figured that out. I spent a decent amount of time with this game trying to figure out what the hell I was doing wrong. And as far as I can tell, it was nothing. Now, like I said, there is kind of a shifting mechanic in this, and simply how it works is you kind of press the accelerator and then you have to let off and let back on with a certain timing. And I got that down, and even still going up against the AI, I never won a single race the entire time I played this. I probably played this for like 45 minutes. I could not win a single time. Unplayable trash. I love racing games, and for me to not even be able to figure out how to simply play one is mind-boggling to me. And at number 2, we have The Last Starfighter, and from every shmup that I've played, I would wager some decent money that this is the worst one possibly ever made. I know that's a hell of a statement, but I seriously mean it. This is, now, I do want to preface by saying I'm not very good at shmups, and I will fully disclose that, but this game is so ridiculous, so easy to die, so absurdly unfair that I save stated considerably just to try to make progress in this, and I was still dying constantly. This is an absolutely impossible game. I can't imagine trying to play this with the limited lives and continues they give you, and even with save states, it was still almost impossible for me to play. Absolutely rough all around. One of the biggest sleeper dog shit games I think I've played in my life. And finally, coming in at number 1, and I said this in the LJN on NES video, and I gotta say it here, as far from everything I've played in the licensed library, I have to say that Uncanny X-Men is the worst game on the system. To give you some insight, I'm gonna let past Kyle take it away here. The Uncanny X-Men. This is absolutely the worst NES game I have ever played in my life. Again, if I manage to find something worse, I'm going to be legitimately shocked. This game plays like an alpha, and I'm not exaggerating. In fact, even just the main menu before you get into the game shows the kind of effort that was put in. All of the menus are a gray screen with white text on top. No sort of graphics, no art, nothing. Just gray screen, white text. Once you get into the game, it doesn't get a whole lot better. Now, off the get, visually, it doesn't look awful once you're in game. It's not like impossibly bad to look at, but essentially the gameplay, you have 2 superheroes that you get to choose, one that you play and then one that the AI plays. You're making your way through these levels, shooting enemies. That's the other thing. Half of the team members have projectiles, the other half do not. If you're gonna play this, I don't know why you would, but you absolutely need to choose the characters with projectiles because the hand-to-hand combat is an absolute clusterfuck of a mess. It does not work properly. The hit detection is terrible. You get constantly spammed by the enemy. You're gonna die real fast if you try to melee. And the other major problem is the fact that your AI player with you, if you're playing solo, of course, will die. In fact, there were multiple instances where I'd maybe be 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and maybe as long as a minute or a minute and a half. Usually not much longer than that. The AI would get themselves killed, and then you're left with fact, only one hero to play as, and you can't swap to that one when you inevitably die, because it will happen. I did not finish a single level in this game, unless you maybe want to count the practice level, because the practice level loads you in, and you scroll up, maybe, it's only like 2 screen lengths tall, I would say. You get up to like the second screen, if you will, and it's just a dead end and nothing happens. As far as I can tell, that's just supposed to be the practice level. There's no end to it. You have to reset the console to get to any of the actual other levels, and I never finished any of them, even though I got many screens in before dying. This one is one of the worst. And there you have it, y'all. That is my top 100 worst licensed NES games list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I think this list came out pretty solid. Like I said, this took a lot more effort and energy than I expected, because frankly, I just had less experience with this console than I did, say, the Super Nintendo. Definitely helps that also I'd played a lot of those games on the Genesis. So this one took a lot more research. Again, I want to thank my Twitch viewers and supporters over on that side of things for allowing me to stream full time and being able to put all this energy and effort into this video. Your support is insanely appreciated. Also, the members to the YouTube, thank you guys for supporting these endeavors. These are huge, massive undertakings of videos, so I really appreciate all the support and you guys being so warm and kind and allowing me to do this as a full-time gig. I really appreciate it. Love to know what you guys have to think down below as well on these games. Is there anything I missed? Anything that you think deserved to be in the top 100 that wasn't? Anything that did make it on the list that maybe you thought shouldn't have? Love to know down below. Thank you guys for watching. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, I've taken no damage though. I'm a pro. Fuck. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. That might need to be a clip. That might need to make it into the video.